All right, guys, Wes here. Welcome back to the channel. And today we've got some news to talk about for Starfield, one of the most anticipated games of 2023, despite all of the skepticism surrounding it. This ambitious Bethesda Game Studios RPG was announced over 5 years ago and has reportedly been in development since 2015. We have some news to talk about regarding the ESRB rating. We're also going to go over the FPS debacle for Starfield. Is it going to run at 60 FPS or is it going to be locked at 30? Bethesda's Todd Howard has described this game as Skyrim in space, and after the company has let so many gamers down with the unfortunate shoddy releases of games like Fallout 76, they really need this game to succeed and repair their good reputation. Xbox also has a lot riding on Starfield's success. Recently, a lot of things regarding Starfield's final state has started circling around the internet, and in this video, we're going to go over all of the new developments and how they'll impact the game we finally are going to get our hands on later this year. So first off, let's start with some really good news regarding id Software. The developers of Doom Eternal and the Doom reboot are actually helping out Starfield's combat system. Now, the initial news that broke came from a 4chan thread. We're gonna kind of dismiss that, but if you look at the previous history of Bethesda's relationship with id Software, this isn't the first time they've worked together. You're probably wondering why Fallout 4's combat was so much better than the previous games. Well, that is simply because id Software helped out Bethesda Game Studios with Fallout 4. This was confirmed in a video titled Fallout 4 Player Freedom in an Open World. Todd Howard basically said that Fallout 4 feels like a modern FPS because Bethesda rebuilt the combat from scratch with the help of id Software, the sister company. And from the first initial gameplay preview that we got for Starfield versus the one from Todd Howard, basically announcing the direct in June, the combat looked really solid in that new gameplay, and you could definitely see the id Software like identity in that gameplay, which I think is a good thing. Next up, we got some brand new details for Starfield in the ESRB rating that was recently published. The rating summary says this, and I quote, "Starfield is an open world role-playing game in which players assume the role as a miner tasked with finding artifacts across the galaxy. From the first/third person perspectives, players interact with the various characters, complete quests, and search for supplies while battling enemies. For instance, humans, robots, and alien creatures. Players use futuristic guns, lasers, axes, and explosives to kill enemies. Combat is fast-paced with frequent gunfire, cries of pain, and explosions. Attack on some enemies can result in blood splatter effects. Several environments depict blood stains on the ground around corpses. The game contains some suggestive material in the dialogue after sharing a bed with a character. For example, the quote, 'Life is like a sexually transmitted disease that's 100% fatal. I'm all for getting a little wild, but next time let's try it without the jetpacks.' Talk about seeing stars. Phew, that was amazing. Starfield features a fictional drug called Aurora, which is a prominent component in this game, with a section involving player characters working in an illicit drug lab. Players can also obtain Aurora by stealing it or buying it from various vendors. When you consume Aurora, it results in a distortion effect on the screen as well. The game also contains the F-bomb and the BS bomb that they also appear in the game. Now, this is an M for mature rating. It's a 17 plus ESRB rating. And the part that a lot of people are really upset about is the bottom left note on the ESRB rating, which the game will feature in-game purchases. Now, initially people were kind of freaking out. They were like, oh my gosh, microtransactions are going to be in Starfield, a single player game that has microtransactions. Oh, the horror. And typically whenever a game says in-game purchases, it does mean that you could purchase things in game, but for this instance, it is via the Creation Club, which is a place that you can go to pay mods and support mod developers. This is currently featured in games like Fallout 4 as well as Skyrim. Now, we could obviously have a debate of ethics in terms of should Creation Club be a thing, or if there's no acceptable circumstance where paid mods should be a thing in a single player game. We could talk about that for hours and hours and hours, but this right here is not new. The people that are upset about this are either uninformed or they're deliberately taking things to the extreme to kind of own the Xbox and other people that support Bethesda Game Studios titles. Now, I personally do not mind Creation Club. I think that if a mod developer wants to put their mod on Creation Club, then they should have the opportunity to be on a platform like that so that they can continue making mods. Next up, I'd like to touch on the community concerns regarding the performance of Starfield. Something that a lot of people are talking about, especially after the release of Arcane Studios' Redfall, is the fact that we don't know whether or not Starfield is going to release at 30 FPS or if it's going to be 60. Well, according to Todd Howard in a recent podcast, he said that by June 11th, we will know whether or not Starfield is going to be 60 or if it's going to run at 30. And honestly, I think Redfall kind of took one for the team. That game launched at 30 FPS rather than being delayed. And of course, we know what happened after that. It was a complete disaster, and it was one of the worst reviewed games that I've seen in my time in gaming in a while. But I truly think that Xbox allowed that to happen for a specific reason, and that is to see the overall sentiment and the reaction of an Xbox Game Studios game releasing at 30 FPS at launch. So I I think Redfall being at 30 FPS kind of forces Xbox into one position, and that is to deal with the backlash of 30 FPS for the console version, delay the console version, or just somehow get that game to target a 60 FPS regardless of the resolution. Now, on the topic of the great FPS debate, there's been a lot of circumstances of that popping up. We got Xbox with the release of Redfall being 30 FPS. We have the magnificent Zelda Tears of the Kingdom running at 30 FPS as well. And then of course we are anticipating whether or not Starfield will hit 30 or if it's going to hit 60. There's a lot of people that are losing their minds that Zelda is getting a ton of praise and it runs at 900p at 30, but with the Redfall release, that game ran at 30 FPS and everybody hated it. Now you could say double standard, but the reality is there was really no saving Redfall. There's a difference between a good game releasing at 30 FPS and a bad game releasing at 30 as well. The reason that we give Zelda Tears of the Kingdom a pass at 30 FPS is because of how ambitious that game is. It's a game of the year worthy game that is even bigger than the first one, and it's a technical marvel that they were able to get it to run on a Nintendo Switch that features a 10-year-old SoC. If Starfield releases and it's 30 FPS, but the game is good, the core of the game is good, and it's a massive title, even with all of its flaws, the Bethesda jank, people will still love it if it's 30. People will give that game a pass, but it all really depends on what kind of game it is. There's also the fact that Starfield is going to be running on the most powerful console ever made, so if it doesn't run at 60 FPS, then it's not really a console problem, it's rather a game development and an optimization problem. But luckily, Xbox's Phil Spencer has stated that Xbox's advanced technology group was doing a lot more work with Bethesda game studios on trying to focus on Starfield and optimize that game, and they didn't do a good enough job with Redfall. But Phil said that they did a much better job with Starfield, but really those are just words until we actually see it in front of us. And I really think that Phil has taken a page from Jim Ryan's playbook and just kind of let the games do the talking. That talking will be done obviously on June 11th during the Starfield Direct. So needless to say, the pressure is on with the Starfield Direct. Now, moving away from the game's technical performance, some new elements of gameplay were recently confirmed and the community is a tad bit mixed on them. For one thing, it was recently made clear that the landing on planets is going to be completely an automated process, meaning you won't be able to freely fly into a planet's atmosphere and land wherever you want while maintaining control of your ship. Instead of when arriving at a planet, the process will be done automatically with a brief cutscene, and then you'll be able to disembark your ship once you've touched down. It's a little disappointing that you won't be able to just freely fly around and land wherever you want, but I also don't think that Bethesda is going to force you to walk everywhere once you're on the planet, so there will most likely be some kind of ground transport for you to take advantage of once you're off your ship. Now, this could be the result of technical limitations, as Bethesda likely didn't have the resources to make a completely interactive landing system for every single planet of the game. I would much rather have the ability to manually land my ship on every planet, but I'm okay with it being an automated process as long as there's movement that's not just walking everywhere. I love having games that are walking simulators, but in a space game, I better have some type of Land Rover that I can use on whatever planet that I want. Or I would personally be fine if Vasco picked me up like Tars did in Interstellar and take me back to my ship whenever I want him to. Now, one thing that did cause some concern among the Bethesda Game Studios community was the departure of a Starfield quest designer, Veronica Harbison. They joined BGS in July of 2021 and was a key part of the Starfield team, but her LinkedIn page confirms that she left the company in February of 23 to join inXile, where she is serving as a quest designer for an unclosed project. Now, when you see any type of employee churn for any game, especially for one as big as Starfield, I mean, with just 5 months on the clock, I don't think that there's much more that a quest designer could do on a game like this, as most of the time now should be spent on QA, polish, bug fixing, and all of that fun stuff. It's also worth pointing out that Harbison joined inXile, which is also owned by Microsoft, so it's entirely possible that her moving from Bethesda to inXile was just an in-house shifting of personnel, as opposed to a dramatic departure caused by turmoil on the Starfield team. The reality is it could be that they just wanted to move, they got better money, and that's why they dipped. But on the topic of quest design, the community is very eager to see how much design, quote unquote, actually went into Starfield versus the amount of procedural generation. With the massive size and scale for the game, a lot of comparisons have been made to games like No Man's Sky, which made use of a lot of procedural generation to make its gigantic world come to life. But the topic of, is Starfield too big of a game? Is it too ambitious for Bethesda? And will they make procedural generation work? Or if it's going to be something like a No Man's Sky launch scenario, where a game that is so infinite in scale is basically nothing. Now, there is the reality that space is vast and there's a lot of emptiness in space. Bethesda has confirmed that some level of procedural generation was used for the sake of getting the game done in a reasonable amount of time, but until we get our hands on the finished product, it's unknown just what ratio of procedural to handcrafted world design will be. Bethesda has actually used procedural generation for its world building in games like Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, and their philosophy is essentially use procedural to get most of the work done, and then from there handcraft on top of the procedural generation. The reality is algorithms like procedural generation as well as AI in general are gonna be taking over gaming. I mean, heck, right now there is a ChatGPT mod with voice acting, and you could talk to the Traveler in Skyrim about how he took an arrow to the knee. But it's looking like Bethesda Game Studios' new procedural generation techniques are up to task. It said that there's going to be over 1,000 planets in this game, and while it's possible that each one will feel totally unique and special, it's also possible that we'll see some similarities between them after a while. With how much time Bethesda has spent on this game and how high stakes it are for them, as well as Xbox's brand, I'm hoping they figured out a good way to balance procedural as well as handcrafted worlds, because it would really be disappointing if Starfield dropped and the planet maps and diversity were similar to what we had with No Man's Sky when it first came out. Todd Howard has said that he has been wanting to make a game like Starfield for a long time, but the technology wasn't there. But now that the tech is here and Starfield is about to release in September, there is a lot riding on them to get Starfield right, and I really do believe that they're going to make it happen. The reality is Fallout 4 had its flaws. It had that Bethesda jank. It had overall performance issues, but it is still a beloved game, and there is still a ton of people playing Fallout 4 right now. So despite all of its issues, if Starfield releases and it's a good game at its core, it's got a good story, the gameplay is replayable, and it's a remarkable experience, then people will give them a pass, regardless of resolutions, FPS, slight performance issues, optimization, and other things that typically make or break games. People will give them a pass. But the reality is we should expect better, and I think that that's what we're going to get with Starfield. And hopefully Bethesda still has what it takes to be one of the best RPG developers in the industry, because if Starfield ends up being as good as I'm hoping it will be, it could turn into the next Skyrim-like game, which is a game that is still talked about, analyzed, and re-released for years to come. But if it ends up falling short and being disappointing, or just outright fails on its expectations, it may just end up being the last Bethesda Game Studios RPG that we get our hands on. Let me know what you guys think about Starfield down in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel with your notifications turned on. Thanks for watching this video, and until next time, this has been Wes, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.